Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Hello and welcome. My name is Rhiannon Roseland, and I am the President and CEO of the Economic Club of Canada, and it's my wonderful pleasure to have all of you with us today for this important conversation. I want to begin by acknowledging that I am a settler on this land, and so what I like to do before I do a land acknowledgement is I like to always point to a particular Indigenous leader in the country that's doing something amazing. And so I want to tell you right now about an incredible group that's working out of 6 nations here in Ontario. They have started a project that is called the Land of the Dancing Deer. And the Land of the Dancing Deer is working to create a traditional healing village where Indigenous medicine and Indigenous ways will be used to help people with mental health, addiction. It's an incredible project. For anybody who would like to learn more, you can Google it, Land of the Dancing Deer. So I want to acknowledge the 7 sisters that are working on that project. And in the spirit of that great work, I would like to acknowledge that we today are gathered on the traditional territory of the Wendat, the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Métis, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. I'd also like to recognize that we are officially coming out of February and honoring Black History Month. And so I'd like to say that for our organization, Black History Month and Black excellence and Black leadership is not something that we just focus on in February. This is something that we want to continue to always focus on throughout the year and all year long. But I do also want to honor that this is the time when we as a collective and as a society honor incredible work of Black leadership. And so it's a special way to end this month, to gather here today and have unique voices come together and speak about how we can build a more inclusive and better Canada and society. I want to thank our annual sponsor, Green Shield Canada, for their generous support in continuing to allow us to do this work. You know, we do 100 events across this country every year, and that is not an easy feat, and it certainly takes partnership, and it certainly takes organizations that get how important it is that we gather and we have true dialogue. So thank you to Green Shield for that support. I'd also like to thank Ryerson University and Dr. Green in particular for the generous support in bringing today's discussion together. I'm a proud alma mater of Ryerson University. I really believe it's where I found my wings. It's where, you know, the first time ever in my life that I felt like I was smart or of value was on that campus. And so I thank Ryerson for being here today, and I thank the leadership of Dr. Green and all the folks at Ryerson that make so much great stuff happen. We are a team of young women that run the Economic Club of Canada. What? We are. And I have to say that when us women, when we sit together at our table and we think about how we want to create a new dialogue in Canada, we are thinking about things like equality and truth and reconciliation and the mental well-being of our labor force. We just have a different lens that we see the world, that we see the country. And I have to say that there are many ideas that are generated around the table from all us women that are there. And today's event was generated by our very own Nafisa Ansong. Now, I have gotten to know Nafisa and work alongside her for, you know, it hasn't even really been that long that we've been together, but I have learned so much from you, Nafisa, in just such a short period of time. And when she came up with this very idea of this panel, right down to the panelists that would be on it, I absolutely said we 100% are behind you and behind you driving this conversation. So you are going to get to hear from Nafisa today as she moderates this panel of women who are incredible leaders, who are people that we can consider also friends and allies as we work together to change the dialogue and change the face of leadership in this country, because it's time. It is definitely time. So I want to honor her and thank her, and it is now my pleasure to welcome Dr. Denise Green from Ryerson's Office of the Vice President of Equity and Community Inclusion to do the opening remarks. I'm giving you like a kiss and then I'm walking away.
grab it and throw it back.
Amazing.
Thank you, Rhiannon, and good afternoon, everyone. Okay, so we will have to try that again. Good afternoon, everyone. Excellent, excellent. I would truly like to thank Rhiannon, Nafisa, and the Economic Club team of women for organizing this event and providing myself, the Office of the Vice President, Equity and Community Inclusion, and Ryerson, an opportunity to partner on this very important conversation, highlighting these important and often untold stories. I myself am looking forward to learning from the panelists about how being a member of the diasporic communities has influenced their leadership style, which is a topic I often reflect upon. For those of you who may not know or can't hear it in my accent, I was born in Chi-Town, Chicago, Illinois, and pretty much for the most of my life lived in the Midwestern US. And certainly being from that part of North America has greatly influenced my own leadership. At Ryerson this winter term, we're actually having conversations about women in leadership. We've been examining the experience of women in leadership roles with a focus on how they can go beyond the glass cliff. I didn't say glass ceiling, I said glass cliff. And I have to share that when I decided to move to Canada and live in Toronto and work, many of my colleagues in the US thought I was actually jumping off the cliff, because many individuals, unfortunately, in the US know very little about Canada. They think about Canada as the 51st state. But we know much better. We know that Canada is an absolute jewel, and I'm so very fortunate to be able to live and work here. So back to the glass cliff. This is a concept analogous to that, as I said, of the glass ceiling, and is a way of describing the phenomenon in which women are appointed to precarious leadership roles when organizations or divisions are not performing well. This may be during a financial downturn, high risk, or likelihood of failure, whereas their male counterparts are appointed to stable, high-performing organizations. The effect represents a subtle yet dangerous form of gender discrimination that may limit workplace diversity and the ability of women to become successful executive leaders. The term glass cliff was only coined in 2004, as more exploration of this topic is very much needed. While this glass cliff may be very, very real, I also believe that oftentimes women of color in particular, are the ones who will step up and take the lead, creating new and innovative ways of leadership and success. In doing this in spaces they are not expected to occupy. Nonetheless, transforming these spaces as they draw upon their will, know-how, and diasporic traditions. And our panelists certainly exemplify trailblazers who have stepped up as transformational leaders. As you will soon learn, today's panel spans multiple generations, possessing experiences and backgrounds that are truly impressive. In 2005, former First Lady Michelle Obama, which I know Rhiannon knows very well, stated, quote, "Black girls rock. No matter who you are, no matter where you are from, you are beautiful. I know there are many voices saying that you are not good enough. Each of those doubts were like a test to either shrink away from or rise to meet. And I decided to rise," end quote. Well, we are very much here today with examples of women leaders who have understood and continue to understand what it means to rise, and indeed, these women really do rock. And while I heard that over here. I heard that, Jean. Yes, you rock too. And while I have your attention, I will do a shameless plug here. Just allow me the opportunity to invite you to mark on your calendars the 3rd annual 100 ABC Women book launch and gala, taking place September 26, 2020. You would be a part of an important event that celebrates the accomplishments of 100 accomplished Black Canadian women. And that's why we say ABC, Accomplished Black Canadian Women from across the country. So without further delay, I will introduce our panelists and moderator. The Honorable Dr. Jean Augustine, our first panelist, was the first African Canadian woman elected to Canada's House of Commons in 1993. She served as a member of Parliament for the Toronto area riding of Etobicoke Lakeshore and went on to win 4 consecutive elections until her retirement from politics, not full retirement, in 2006. Her official retirement from the Fairness Commission happened much later, but certainly she has not slowed down. Next, we have Farheen Khan. Farheen is a principal consultant of her own firm, FSK Associates. Farheen has held several leadership positions working for and providing oversight in the areas of capacity building, community engagement, fundraising, marketing, and communications in organizations of varying scales. We also have Agapi Gessesse, who is currently the Executive Director of CEE, Center for Young Black Professionals. She is a passionate, driven, and visionary leader who champions the mission and vision of CEE to address economic issues affecting Black youth. And lastly, our moderator, Nafisa Ensong, Stakeholder Relations Coordinator for the Economic Club of Canada. Let's welcome them all.
Hello. Hi, everyone. This is an amazing audience. I love to see all these beautiful faces, and thank you to Dr. Green for that amazing introduction. My name is Nafisa, and I work at the Economic Club of Canada, and I know that this is going to be a wonderful and impactful conversation, and I'm excited to be moderating a panel with these wonderful high guests of honor. It's truly a dream come true for me. So, obviously, we're all here to talk about women in leadership positions from the diaspora. And I want to get into the nitty-gritty. I want to be real about it. And we know that when you are from the diaspora, when you're a person from the diaspora, there are two sets of expectations. The first set of expectations can be from the places that you originate, your traditions and your culture. And then there's a second set of expectations, maybe from the place that you've settled in. So my question to the panel is, how have you been able to navigate, elevate, and maybe even dispel these expectations? How did those feelings feel for you? And I'm going to start off specifically with Dr. Jean Augustine for this question, and we'll go from there.
Okay, pick on the old lady, right?
I'm sorry. We have to honor you.
They talk about the intergenerational conversation. So this is why I put myself in that generation ahead of you, Agapi. I am so very pleased to see this gathering. And not only am I pleased to see this gathering, but I'm excited by the fact that young women and women of color and women from various places would come together lunchtime on a Friday to listen to other women. And this is really an amazing thing, and a congratulatory note to all of you for being here. One cannot speak about the present without kind of going back to the past. And I've been mentioning a bird called the sankofa. And the sankofa bird is a symbol, an African bird, the symbol of a bird with its neck, long neck, and the neck is looking back, because it's important to look back to know where you are and to plan for where you're going. We say this in various ways in our communities. We say you have to know where you're coming from to know where you're going to. And so when we talk about involvement of women, and we talk about how we in this society bring with us our traditions, our culture, our various religious views, how we shaped, and then we come into a culture where we get and have to use and be part of that culture. So for example, I cannot take away the fact that I grew up in Happy Hill, St. George's, Grenada, that I grew up, any Grenadians here? That I grew up in an extended family situation with lots of women around. And I've said this before, there must have been lots of men around too, but I remember all the women. Because they were the ones who handled the finances, they were the ones who made the decisions around a whole series of, family business, family things. They were the ones who encouraged us, yes, you can do it. So I came to Canada with a sense of self. I came to Canada knowing that the old saying, to whom much is expected, and I was told that all the time, you have to serve, you have to give back, you have to participate. Don't just stand back and let others do it. So I used all of those past to guide my present, and also that present leading me to some goals within the society that I wanted to accomplish.
We're all astonished by this amazing response. Thank you.
Astonished that I came from Grenada?
Yeah. No, astonished by just, your responses are just really amazing to me. I'm sorry, you're just such a role model to me. And then we'll go with Farheen. Yeah.
Okay, so well, that's a hard act to follow.
I know, right?
I'm going to do my best here. So I think for me, my life has been quite different. I think back to sort of where my family comes from, and then thinking back to where I am today, and sort of the journey that I've had. And so my family comes from India, and then we arrived here. My father arrived in the early 70s. And so for us, you know, we come from a very traditional family. There's a lot of expectations that are put on women in particular. We normally have very strong male figures in our society, and so it was a bit, there were women, but their strength was looked at in a very different way. It was the ability to be a caregiver, to be a nurturer, to be a mother, more so than necessarily being a woman in a leadership position. And so for me, growing up, it was really looking at my father and really understanding, you know, and sort of aspiring to be much like him, which was a bit unusual, I would say, in my family context. But it was something that, you know, I'm grateful that my father kind of nurtured and supported me through, because I was empowered enough to do the work that I'm doing now. So there's sort of the traditional kind of, you know, expectations, and then there's the, but there's also sort of the, there was a bit of irony in terms of the way I was being raised. So, you know, here I am as a young woman, as a daughter, being told, yes, you can be anybody you want to be, you can do anything you want to do. But, you know, going into the religious institutions, which like my father founded in Mississauga, you know, the traditions were that women were not in positions of leadership and that they didn't have necessarily a front and, you know, outward facing, you know, role. So for me to now come to a place where, you know, I've founded the Women's Mosque of Canada is a huge sort of step in our community to be able to say it's time for women to take a leadership position within the religious institutions. It's time for us to finally, you know, find our voice and, you know, do it in a way where we can actually create that space for ourselves. And start to heal as women, and then, you know, from there actually begin to, you know, influence society in a way where women are being honored across the board. So,
Agapi, do you want to expand on that?
Yeah. Well, like you get me to go third. I think when I think about my childhood, my mother was a single mother, and she passed away when I was 14. So I think culturally, she instilled a lot in me that I didn't even realize till way after she passed. Like, I really retained a lot in 14 years, you know? And I didn't get to know my father until my mother passed away, like years after my mother passed away. So my mother always told me, like, there wasn't a thing I ever did. Like, when she came to this country, she touched down, touched this land, and was like, we're doing this, you know? Like, anything, I played the violin, the piano, I swam, like, anything any other Canadian did, I did. Like, and now that I think back on, like, how much she made, I don't know how she did it, but, you know, here we are. So I was always taught, like, you can be anyone, you can do anything. And it wasn't until I started to get to know my father where I was just like, I'm sorry, no. Like, I remember telling him, I'm gonna go back to school. And my dad was like, oh, you already have a piece of paper, like, why are you going back? And I'm like, what? Okay. He's like, you know, now's the time where you need to find a husband. And I'm like, okay, like, I could do that and go to school, you know? And he was just like, well, like, you have to focus on that. And I was just like, okay, so let me go and take some culinary arts courses so that I can cook for him then. And he's like, that's a great idea, yes. And I'm like, no, that's not it, right? So it wasn't so culturally, although my mother instilled like a lot of good values, like religion, for instance, like we went to Sunday, did not matter. If it was rain, snow, sleet, like we're going. We never owned a car, so like we were trucking it. And like that was a really big part. Like I watched my mother fast and pray, and like we did not have much. And I would always wonder like, okay, is homeboy listening to you? Because like you're doing all this praying, right? But so when I was younger, I would think to myself, you know, she really like loves this guy, but I don't really see any movement, you know? But it wasn't until I got older that I realized, like, traditionally we were raised Greek Orthodox. My parents lived in Greece before they moved to Canada, and so we were Greek Orthodox, Ethiopian. I'm Ethiopian in my background, and Ethiopian Orthodox is but I grew up in the Greek Orthodox religion, and it's all about, like, religiosity, you know? And I always just thought to myself, like, my mom had so much strength in her faith. And I really wanted to like get to know that part. Like I'm like, okay, who's this God guy? And like, how can I get to know him better, right? And the religion that was practiced in my household did not allow me to do that. And so when I converted, I didn't realize, like, to non-denominational, I wanted to build relationship with Christ as opposed to just think like, if I kneel 10 times, then maybe I'll make it to heaven, you know? And when that part of my journey really started, when I wanted to build relationship, it was almost as though I like brought shame on my family, you know? Like my dad was just like, well, what do you mean? But don't really share that with anyone, you know what I mean? And so that was another instance where I realized my culture and being assimilated into Canadian culture was not jiving with my community, and it was conflicted. So I would say those are two of like the instances where I kind of had these moments of like, oh, I guess this is not okay, you know?
And I want to just build on that because I think you mentioned, Farheen, you mentioned just about conflicting expectations and how that can adversely affect how you see yourself and how you see yourself in the world. And I want to talk specifically about mental health too. I want to link that to how you view yourself. And so a recent study was actually released this February by the American Psychological Association, reinforcing what we already know, that the trauma of racism can actually shorten the lifespan of an individual because of chronic stress. And we all know that racism 100% is trauma, and whether it's the lack of representation during a young woman's formative years or it's the microaggressions endured in the workplace, it's very difficult to navigate these spaces. So my question to you is how have you been able to kind of navigate that space? What advice would you give for women from the diaspora to take care of themselves, mind, body, and spirit? And I'll start with you, Farheen, on that one.
Okay, great. Sorry, I think my mic is it okay? Can you still hear me? Okay, great. I feel like I'm hearing
In and
myself. Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, firstly, I want to say thank you for the question because I think it's something really important that we need to acknowledge. You know, for me, sometimes what happens is that, you know, we start to, at least personally, we get to a point where, or I have at times realized that
it's really heavy.
that it becomes so internal. It's not that it's internalized, we become desensitized, right? So for me, it's like there are times where it becomes so desensitized to the issue in terms of, you know,
It's heavy.
somebody saying something or that microaggression that it really starts to, you know, in a very, it's one of those things where it's like, okay, great, yeah, please. Okay. I'll just ignore this? Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. That's a lot better.
Thank you.
I can actually hear myself properly. Sorry. So what I was saying was that, you know, in terms of, for me, I've come to a place where I've become, you know, at times I've become very desensitized because it's just so common and it's so ongoing, right? Whether it's the assumption that, you know, I don't speak the language or, you know, speaking at a big conference and somebody coming over and saying, wow, you spoke really well, good for you, you know? It's one of those things where it's like, how many times do, you know, I need to reiterate the fact that I was born here, I grew up here, you know, I'm, quote, Canadian. You know, I ran in the federal election in 2015. I mean, you know, people were looking at me all over the place and just, you know, their minds were just turning of like, wow, she speaks English. Oh my God, she like really knows what she's talking about. So those things are very real, but it just becomes, it gets to a point where sometimes it becomes laughable, not because I want to, but it's just because it's so unfortunate, right? It's the ignorance. So it's definitely something that I think personally for me, I've come to acknowledge and realize that the importance of that, like you said, Nafisa, the question, the mind, body, and spirit is so important to take care of. So, you know, over time, I came from a very difficult background. I've started working since I was really young. We grew up in project housing, and so I neglected my physical body quite a bit, and I've lost a significant amount of weight in the last 10 years, I would say, to really start to take care of my physical health. Yeah. Only recognizing that the physical, the emotional, and the spirit are so connected, right? If we're not healthy in a very holistic way, then it's just not possible to keep doing the work. There's just so much that, you know, energetically we carry when we're doing this type of work, and there's constantly that kind of, you know, negative pressure, if you will, of people and their expectations on you all the time, that unless we do that, we're going to end up in a place where, we become sick. So, sometimes I always say, like, when I first heard the words like self-love and self-care and like affirmations and looking at yourself in the mirror and all these things, it just didn't feel like it was something I could necessarily connect with. But it took me time to realize, like, no, I am worth it. I do matter. I need to make sure that however I do that and whatever feels right for me, I take the time to really love myself, because I need to be able to have, that confidence and that grounding, if you will, to be able to continue the work.
I agree. And I definitely think we should also normalize these conversations in our communities, for sure. Yeah. Agapi.
Okay. Well, I think if we look at like the concept of Sankofa, like you have to look back and know who you are. As people of color, we need to understand our ancestors. Even if you look at your grandparents, your parents, like we're resilient people. Like nobody can do it like us, I'm just saying. And so the reality of that is like you have to know who you are, like first and foremost. And I think anybody who is of color, who is like living in North America, if you can afford it, I think you need to have some type of therapy. Like if you're paying to pay somebody to teach you how to meditate, or, or if your prayer is your yoga, whatever. Like we need to find like a place where we can reflect on who we actually are and not what other people are telling us, because that is like first and foremost, I think. And then I think when we're talking about ways to cope with that, like even for myself, I've always done this work. This time, this moment, this is what I'm called to do. Like I already know that. Me and Joe D, remember we had that conversation, and like he's like, Agapi, this is what you need to be doing. So this is what I'm doing, right? So I know I'm supposed to be here. And like I've been doing this work, and it wasn't until I started to be like, I want to be unapologetic about standing for who I want to. And so I took this job, and I'm working specifically with Black youth. And I found the first 8 months, I was just so tired. And I'm like, honestly, Lord, what is going on? And it was because I was knocking on doors, I was having conversations with people, and everyone was like, this is reverse racism. Why do you only work with Black youth? Oh, no, I don't want to give my money to that. And so even though I'm representing an organization, and I'm sitting in front of that person, and they're telling me no, they're saying no to me as a person, like, I don't think you're worth my time. I don't think, so as much as I'm trying to raise money for the organization, you're basically saying, like, you think my entire race is, like, not it, And so I had to be like, I need to actually seek help. Like, I need a coping mechanism to be able to compartmentalize, like, when somebody says no to me, that's a them thing and not a me thing, And so I think when you're doing even anything really in life, I just think you have to, number one, know why you're doing it and know who you are in the inside. And then you have to come to this mature moment where you seek help outside of yourself or like your community, or even having these conversations. Like we're always in our phones. We're like, I've got this watch. It's like, honestly, the devil. Like it's just like I walk around with it, and like I'm constantly, looking, it follows me everywhere. Like we're always connected to this thing. And if you believe it or not, people are like craving dialogue. Like this is a full house at lunchtime because people want to have real conversations with people. So even if you don't pay someone $120 to listen to your problems, like coming out to things and having dialogue with people and knowing like someone can physically come and help me with something, or like someone I can see and not behind the computer cares about something that I care about and I can connect with them. Like I think that in our community has historically been therapy, So that's my advice.
Great. Dr. Jean Augustine.
Thank you.
I can learn from the youth. I came to an understanding of myself very, very early in life. I came from, as I said, an extended family situation with lots of family and members interacting, some positively and some not so positively. And I was taught, and I learned very, very early, that you don't get into fights that's not your own. So if Aunt this is fighting with Aunt whatever, and they're quarreling with somebody else, that's their whatever. You remain friends with all of them despite what the dynamics of what's happening. I learned also very, very early the sense of self, that there were things that I could do, that there were things I was good at. And I think one has to work through that. What am I good at? I'm good at associating with people, talking to people, being where people are, exchanging with people. I was good at forming organizations, joining things. And so there were a whole series of things, whether it was the band playing an instrument, or whether it was a church group, or whether it was a group going out to raise funds for something. So very early through my life, that was a kind of service mode, but with confidence. And so when I came to Toronto in 1960, this was a different world, a different world. And I've been saying this time a few other speeches. We had no Charter of Rights and Freedom. That didn't come till 1982. We had no Landlord and Tenant Act, so that the landlord could say it's for rent but not for you. We had no rules around school boards, talking to parents, talking to community. We had no community schools. We did not have a human rights code as we know it today, so there was no place to go to complain. We had no police-community relations, community talking to the police, or police talking to community, or there were so many things in the society that as I walked around 1960 and others, the society was ripe for activism. We wanted to make things happen. We wanted to make sure that you did not have to go for training if you wanted a job at CBC on the radio, so that you can get your accent and know how to pronounce your A's and your O's and your whatever else, so that you can speak on the radio. We wanted to see some faces, and different faces of color on television. There was none at the time. So there were several things. And so I came with that sense of self, with my Oxford and Cambridge overseas school certificate, which was more than grade 13.
Right.
And I fell into organizing, being part of community, because I grew up learning that being part of community was important. I grew up learning, and my grandmother used to say this all the time, if it's to be, it's up to you. If you make it happen, if you want to see this happen, you make it happen. And something I learned very early, if you are going to knock something down, in other words, criticize or be critical of, before you open your mouth, she used to say, have a solution. So don't tear something apart if you cannot offer something in return. So the issue of mental health, as I watched, and I watched colleagues who came with me, I came on what was called the Canada Caribbean Domestic Scheme. We signed up that we would work in the home of a family in return for landed immigrant status. And I watched some of my friends who were sent to homes. In those days, it was called Manpower. Manpower had placed them, what do we call it now? Not Manpower anymore.
Like a job agency?
No?
Human resources?
Not human resources. Come on, you young people.
Service Canada?
Well, no, it's another name now. But anyway, I came also on Trans-Canada Airline. Do you know Trans-Canada Airline? Right? It was TCA, now it's Air Canada.
Oh.
Right?
Okay.
So things have changed, names have changed.
Yeah.
Right? So we don't talk about anti-racism, and we don't talk about, we talk now about microaggression, and we nuance language into diversity and inclusion. So we can see that times have changed and things have changed. And I watched some of the young people who came with me at the time, and we were all the young people. I watched the stress, the pressure, the wanting to cope, trying to fit into Canadian society, the demands that were made on them, the assumptions that were made, as you said, that they couldn't read 2 lines. There were so many things that created stress for individuals. And if you didn't have a good sense of self, you would break under the stress. And I think it's so important, we were exchanging earlier in the room, that there was a time I knew everybody in my network, phone numbers by heart. You know what by heart means? I'm sure you
Yeah. I do.
Right? And because that was, we didn't have the cell phone to get to, and we did not have so many helpful tools that you have now. So if I met Agapi and I asked her phone number, because I want to call her later on, I memorized the phone number, or I wrote it down somewhere where I can easily access it. So things have changed. And the stress of this lack of an extended family, the stress of daycare for children when you have to work yourself, the stresses of single motherhood, or single mothers wanting to cope and do the best. And all those things that are set up in the society that you should do this, and you should do the other, and you should do the next. And a lot of our young people, and a lot of the young people I talk to who are experiencing stress, it's because there are so many boxes they have to check off. So many boxes to check off, because I have to be this, I have to do this, I have to join this, I have to be here, I have to be seen here. I have to put out a picture of that lunch we just had so the whole world can see we had chicken and rice for lunch. Right?
Guilty.
So, you know, all of these things, I have to get home. I can't just get home and relax and call Johnny and say, what's up? Because I can't do that, because I have to go and look at all those emails. I have over 3,000 email on my computer. I mean, who does that? But we spend so much time. There are so many things for us to check off. And this creates stress. It creates stress. And put on top of that, the crank calls that you get, right? You, Mrs. Augustine, someone just put $1,000 in your credit card. Did you do what? Yes, but what is my credit card number? They're expecting me to tell them my credit card number when they're telling me that an amount has been put on the credit card. So there are just so many things that are coming at us. And so the mental health, it disturbs, it distracts. There is no downtime. There is no time for us to reflect. There is no time for us to have the intimacy. You know, there was a time when I was young and whatnot. You go for a quiet dinner somewhere with music and lights and candle and whatever else. Who does that now? Right? You rush in, you rush out. You take a picture of the food and you put it out there. You can tell how upset I am.
Okay, I will not be doing that.
People's dinner.
Yeah, I will not be doing that.
I'm having bacon and eggs for breakfast.
We are not doing that, right? We're not doing that.
Nobody here does that.
Yeah, no, we don't do that. So something that I think everyone on this panel has discussed is, you know, the importance of relationships with one another, the importance of maintaining healthy relationships. And I think that when we talk about leadership, maintaining relationships in general is not something that we really talk about. It's really minimized, whether they're familial relationships, whether they're platonic relationships, or whether they're romantic relationships. But we all know that these are just a critical element of all of our lives. And so what I want to know is, what relationships have you nurtured in your life that were most meaningful and valuable to you? And what is one cardinal rule that you stick by in assessing your relationships with others? And I'll start with Agapi with this.
Yeah. Okay, so I think there's Bishop T.D. Jakes has this concept where there's 3 people in your lives. There's a confidant, a constituent, and a comrade. Confidant is someone you tell everything to. They're down for you no matter what, highs, lows, they're there, you can tell them everything. Then there's people who are your constituents. They're for what you're for. So like maybe when you work with somebody, you know, at sea, you know, I have people who are working towards this thing, we're gonna build this organization, and we're doing something together. Then you have folks who are your comrades, and your comrades are people who are against what you're against, right? So you'll have really strange bedfellows in that kind of category, because it's just like, you know, I don't like a particular, you know, I hate racism, you know, and then somebody else who doesn't like racism, who doesn't look like me, but like we have that in common.
Yeah.
We're gonna fight that fight, and then we're gonna hopefully see it through, and when the task is over, you know, we separate.
Mm-hmm.
Your comrades and your constituents are always going to leave you, and you have to be okay with that, you know? Your confidants, which is very rare, but you can confuse your constituents and your confidants, and that's where I think people get it messed up, you know? Because you think you have like these people, and you're like, we're riding together, and da-da-da, and then somebody else who's like for what you're for is doing something cool over there, and then they jump ship and they go do it over there, and you're like imagine you work with someone for 10 years, you're building this thing, and then they're like, yeah, it's been great, but I'm gonna go work.
Gotta go.
Yeah, I'm gonna go work for your competition or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Like you're gonna be like, oh, but I thought we were in this. Like you've confused what that person's role is. So for me, I think relationships are super important, but I use that lens in everything I do. I have to acknowledge, like, am I misappropriating where this person should be, right? Number one. So you kind of detach yourself from the outcome in a way with that. And then I think also having people around you who are at times smarter than you and doing better than you. And like, you have to have people around you who you can want to be like, right? Like even when I think about, you know, my own situation, like I pretty much from 14 onwards was kind of like in this world alone and had to figure life out. But it was like, shout out to Patrick and Marina, my best friend's parents, who were like they were always there in the background, and I knew that if I was in like any really deep trouble, that I could reach out, right? And like anytime that there was like Christmas, Thanksgiving, like all of those things we'd spend together. But their son was all of my friends that I grew up with were all doing really awesome things. So like, even though I had the freedom because I was living by myself and I was like, could do anything, I just didn't, I literally was like an at-risk youth, you know? Like when they talk about that, like I was that, you know? Because I was at risk to be doing great things or like super unproductive things, right? Yeah. But I had people around me who were doing positive things. So it's like, I didn't want to get left behind, you know, like they were all going to university. So I'm like, I better like get to this book, you know, I better like get the grades that I need if I want to keep up with my peers. So I think like that philosophy is what kind of the 3 people is what like is my overarching. But I think in terms of relationships in business or in friendships, it's like you have to have people who are greater than you, but then you also need to have people who you're bringing with you. And I think especially people, women and women of color in specific, like you need to be, once you get in that elevator, once you get to the second, like maybe the 3rd floor, you know, like not even all the way to the penthouse, you gotta be like, okay, let me bring that back down. Yeah. And then somebody else needs to come up, because there has to be something on both ends. And like you have to have mentors and people you want to be like, but also you have to understand that you have a responsibility as well to do the same, because people give to people. They don't give to organizations. Like, I'm pretty sure that, yeah, thank you for the clap. You know? I think that when you're fundraising, that's why people are so concerned about who's the leader of an organization, right? Or a country, let's say. You have to, if you are somebody who is not likable, right, or doesn't have good intentions, no one's going to give you that money, even if you are supposedly doing it for a good cause. You know, people give to people, and I think the more we understand that, the more, you know, we'll do better.
I agree. Farheen, do you have to?
So for me, I would say my life has been, when I was younger, I was very much, my family was kind of, you know, the group that I was very connected to, and, you know, they were my support system. But as I've changed and transformed, as I've sort of stepped out of the box, if you will, and have really started to push the boundaries, I've had to find relationships and people and a support system of people who have the courage to stand with me during the difficult times. Because the work is not actually easy, right? And so as we continue to do that, it's really being able to find those individuals, like you said, Agapi, who, you know, are actually doing something that's greater than ourselves, you know, that I can actually look to and say, wow, these are what people have, you know, like, for example, I've been able to come into, you know, and I'm very honored to be able to start to step into some spaces where as a quote, you know, female leader, I'm being invited to spaces where there's Indigenous elders and women Indigenous elders as well, who are being able to, you know, really inspire me further in terms of their experiences and what they've been able to accomplish in their life. And, you know, really looking at that kind of matrilineal sort of way of living and how important that is. So being able to find individuals, you know, not just within my own community, but in other places that, you know, really I can look up to and I can reach out to if I need. And as you said, Agapi, like, bring others behind as well to be able to really support women to get through that is really important. And I think that, you know, having been through, sure, Dr. Augustine, you can relate to this, having been through, in my very small experience of being a candidate, not even being elected, you know, there's such a facade around you. There's very few that are actually real relationships that are meaningful, that people will actually stand by you. And so, you know, going through some of those challenges has really helped me identify who those people are. So when you really find those people who are willing to, you know, stay with you no matter what, those are the people to keep around.
Yeah, I agree. You got to figure out who your ride or dies are. You got it. Dr. Jean Augustine.
Most of the people whom I call friend and put in the category of friend are people that I've known for years and years and years. I see a few of them in this room. We go back 40 years ago, 40 years, 50 years. They're long-standing. We don't see each other on a daily basis, but I can call, or they can call, or when we meet, the big embrace and the catching up. And I think we need to have those people in our lives. They don't have to be with us every day. We don't have to speak to them on the phone every day, or we don't have to text them every day. But we know that they're there and they have our backs, as it were. I have always been very cautious about letting myself, and maybe this is a weakness that I'm publicly putting out there.
It's just us.
Exposing myself to the world with what, you know, with my doubts or with any insecurity or whatever. I am not one who open up or would call somebody and say, you know, so and so and so and so in my life and this is falling apart and whatnot. I do the solutions. I look for solutions and I do whatever, because nothing upsets me most than when somebody comes back to you at some later time and remind you of something in the past. You guys know what I mean?
Yes.
You remember the time when and use that as a way of. And I learned in my life in politics that you do not allow any points of whatever to be known by your caucus, by your party, by your whatever else, because it comes back at some point in time as a point of reference You know, well, you know, we can't do whatever with Jean, you know, because remember when, or remember da-da-da-da-da-da. I've always held myself, as the British would say, with this stiff upper lip, you know.
Yeah.
I keep my pain to myself. I try to work it out. And very few people do I bring into the enclosure of full. I don't know that I have. There is something called, I see around, BFF.
You definitely
What's
have
that?
a BFF.
Best friend
Everyone
forever.
here thinks that
Right?
best friend forever.
Best friend. I'm not, this best friend concept of, what are you guys laughing at? The BFF?
Yeah, best friend. I think in our minds, we all think you are our BFFs. That's why we're all laughing.
But the other thing is, I am also not a clingy person. And there are people who are really clingy, you know what I mean? That you're my friend and therefore you have to be with,
Yeah, you like your
you have to
space.
tell me everything and
Yes.
you have to know everything and, you know,
We call that stage five clinger. Yeah.
Yeah. You got to identify
See,
those.
she has a terminology. So I've always had safe distance.
Yeah.
I speak about things that I think would help me, would help them to help me. But I don't know that I've ever cried on anybody's shoulder. Maybe it's a weakness, as I said earlier. Maybe it's a confession, but I've always felt that that I look for my own
Your own
solutions
solutions.
to my own problems. I think the whole issue of resilience is something that's born in Black women. And that resilience to fall on your behind and to pick yourself up and to keep going is something that I learned very early, and I do this all the time. So I don't wait for somebody to pick me up. And I don't fall and lie on the ground moaning and complaining and whatever else, waiting for somebody to come running to pick me up. And as I said, could be a weakness. Maybe I need to. At the same time, I have a relation with God.
Yeah. Right?
And it's not that I don't have any prayer, and I don't remember ever praying, give me this, God give me this, God give me that. My prayer and my only prayer have always been, thy will be done. Do it, Lord. Thy will be done. And I figure whatever path I've taken, it's because it's a path that's there, thy will be done. Thy will be done. And so the issue of getting other people on side, that's part of my modus operandi. Everything I do, I bring a whole lot of people with me. I have a party, everybody comes, and they have a good time.
We're all coming.
I have a gathering, everybody comes. I bring and try to bring people with me and bring people into the circle and give them the experience. What they do with the experience, oftentimes it's up to them. But I think that mentoring and that role modeling and that getting people in the circle so that they could experience things. And this is why, Nafisa, I want to say thank you. And Rihanna, I want to say what you're doing with this economic club and the series of lunches that you have. They are great gatherings to bring people together. So after a while, people who've come should get to know each other, should get to network. And Toronto will be a far, far better place as a result of that way in which we expand and we get the message out and we get that sense of love and respect for each other.
Thank you. So this last question is going to be super quick.
I thought it
because
was closing.
that would have been an amazing close. I appreciate it. We're just gonna, but I just want to end on a super high note. I'm a very firm believer in a warm and fuzzy feeling, and I think we need to be really proud of our accomplishments. And I just wanted to quickly go, Farheen first, if we could talk about what you are most proud of in your leadership. What do you enjoy most about, you know, what you've been able to complete?
That's such an interesting question. Well, I don't know that where I am today that I could say that I've gotten to where I need to be, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I still feel like I'm on a journey, and every time I feel like I've hit a certain milestone, I'm sort of challenging myself to the next thing. So I think if I can be proud of it, of what I have accomplished, I would say that I've come a long way as a person. I've been able to transform in many ways and really open my mind and really experience a lot more of the world. So I'm very happy about that, and the ability to be able to, you know, continue to be a voice, if you will, for those that, you know, in some way or shape or form I'm representing. But I would say that I'm just excited to be on the journey, and I think that it's just, you know, continuing to be on the journey and being able to get more like-minded people around me and, you know, really on board with the kind of work that I'm doing, I think is just what really excites me. So thank you.
Dr. Jean Augustine, we're going to go with you.
It's your turn.
What are you most proud of?
What am I most
Yeah,
proud of?
what are you most proud of that you've been
Well,
able to
first
do?
of all,
There's so many.
I have two beautiful daughters and two
Yes.
lovely grandsons.
Yes.
So I'm proud of that. I'm also at the point in life when, someone said it the other day and I was a little, when I have more road behind me than I have road ahead of me. I'm 82 years old, and so when I look back, I see several things that have been accomplished in the society. I'm talking generally Canadian society or Toronto society. You see the many, many changes that we can have this many people in the room, that we have so many organizations that are doing really good work, organizations that were not there before, that we're talking about diversity and inclusion in just about every corporate and religious and the marketplace and every place else. We're recognizing that we have to have the face of our streets reflected in our organizations and in our businesses. We also have the opportunity to converse with each other and to know each other's stories and history. And I think I'm hopeful that the Toronto I met in 1960 when I came, that Toronto